Hey everyone, it's Audie. This is The Assignment, and today we're going to be talking about the quintessential American dynasty, a family that has been everywhere over the years, magazine covers and conspiracy forums, and the halls of power. My guest today is George Civeris, co-host of the podcast United States of Kennedy, which digs into America's enduring fascination with this mid-century Camelot.
Only one family has had a member in office since 1947. One family has shaped American history decade after decade. That's the Kennedy family.
And it's funny, I was hired to do this show to be sort of the funny one. You know, the kind of, the point was that...
I can tell from your main points that's not how it worked out.
I know, I've become so serious.
I know.
I promise I'm funny.
Together, we're going to talk about why we're in the middle of yet another Kennedy-obsessed moment. From FX's retconned retelling of JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bissett's love story, to RFK Jr.'s Maha Sun King era, to this latest generation that's lining up to run for office. I mean, the names change, but the main character energy remains the same. So what do the stories that we tell about them actually say about us? Stay with us.
This is something that, for me, I really jumped at this opportunity to host this podcast because I have gaps in my 20th century American history. And it is for a very simple reason. It's because I went to high school outside of America. My family is Greek, so we moved back to Greece when I was 12, and I went to high school in a Greek-speaking school. I then came back for college, but did a STEM degree. I did not do a humanities degree, so I don't have a lot of the kind of... I have some gaps when it comes to both just like the canon in the humanities and also just like American history and things.
So this is like a skeleton key for you.
Very much so.
See, my family, it was baseball. Like, I endured some time in Little League purely because my parents said that's what Americans do.
Yes.
And it sounds like the Kennedys are your baseball.
Absolutely. And I was, I grew up in Greece, and Jackie Kennedy, who then married Aristotle Onassis, was a huge pop culture figure just in Greece. Sort of a fun fact is that the biggest gay club in Mykonos is called Jackie O. So if you know any gay guys that are vacationing in Mykonos, they have probably gone to Jackie O and seen a drag show. So
I think of paparazzi, right? The idea of paparazzi, like following Jackie O, like coming from naming the Italian press, right? That was like following her in the tabloids. It's very, that's a great anchor point, I think. Where I want to start, actually, that I think is important, just from what I know of their history, is a sort of paterfamilias, right? Like the grandfather who was like, you are all going to run for president.
Right.
So just give us a glimmer of Joseph Kennedy, like the original.
So the original Joseph Kennedy, this is someone who was incredibly, incredibly ambitious, just wanted to make a ton of money and wanted to, for him or for one of his children to be president in no uncertain terms. It wasn't that...
And what I like about him is everything you want to know about how the Kennedys operated in the world since, you can know from understanding him, because he worked for the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
He shorted stocks. He ran a bunch of radio or TV stations. Like, he helped seed RKO. Like, he is at the nexus of the modern politician in a way as we know it.
Very much so. And there was something, dare I say, Trumpian about him, and about, I don't want to be too controversial, about the Kennedy family overall. And part of it is the hunger for power and influence, of course. But the other part is he understood early on the intersection between entertainment and politics. So he was in politics. He was ambassador to Great Britain. And in fact, something that really kind of ruined his career is that he supported appeasing Hitler before the U.S. joined the war
you're
effort.
Saying something. That was the thing.
Yes.
And he lost his political juice pretty quickly.
Right. And then he was very involved in Hollywood and in production. And that kind of, again, Trumpian attention to the entertainment industry and as it relates to DC was something that was carried on by JFK as well.
JFK, even being on camera next to Nixon, is considered an inflection point moment for modern politics, right? Who looked good? on camera. Well, guess what? A Kennedy. You know what I mean?
I know. We had that
like
was
that's a thing we still refer to every time there's a debate when we're doing like political commentary. And I was digging through this history to kind of prepare for this conversation. And I read that like during one of the early elections he had for one of the sons, he did like coffee with the Kennedys. He ran infomercials that looked like a chat show in the 50s.
And I think that kind of image making really worked and still works.
Yeah.
And I mean, JFK was signing off on the surveillance of civil rights figures. Like JFK was not some saint. And the fact that the mythology remains is really a testament to exactly the kind of self-perpetuated image making that you're describing.
So that brings us to one other Kennedy I think we should reference in all of this. Do you know who I'm going to say?
Is it Rosemary?
No, it's Ted.
It's Ted. Okay.
We'll come to the women.
Okay. Well, yes, that's
we'll come to the women because that's a whole other thing.
I know that's a pattern. You know, that's a recurring theme in
yes,
this.
But the men, I just want to get to
Kennedys.
the one last, like,
of course.
You know, one of the hopes to become president, Ted Kennedy. Again, being from Massachusetts and having covered the Senate when he was considered the lion, the liberal lion of the Senate in his twilight years. Famous photo of him with Barack Obama. And because they had a massive rally for Obama in the 2008 campaign, people came to associate the Kennedy political progressive halo as being like passed on to Obama. Which is hard for people to remember now, like that was not Jesse Jackson. Like that was the Kennedys, and it was yet another way that it symbolized Obama's difference from past Black political power. But back to Kennedy. The problem with Ted Kennedy, of course, is his political aspirations were over very early in his career because he was involved with the death of a young woman in an incident known as Chappaquiddick.
That's right.
Give us the cliff notes of Chappaquiddick.
Chappaquiddick, they were on Chappaquiddick Island in Massachusetts, and they were in the midst of this, you know, party that I'm sure involved alcohol and whatever else with young staffers of Bobby Kennedy, who had recently been assassinated. So it was sort of a very emotional night. Long story short, he's in a car with a young woman named Mary Jo Kopechne, and he drives off a cliff. The car goes into the water, and he gets out. She doesn't. And the controversy starts when it takes him basically all night before he calls the police.
Yeah, this is in summer of 1969. So again, let's think of that period, right? Like where America was in 1969. And I actually went and looked up his Chappaquiddick speech. Do you mind if I quote from it?
Oh, please.
So he's trying to explain to the public why he has been charged with leaving the scene of a crime that, like, you know, ended in somebody's death. And he starts talking about his thoughts. He says he was confused. He had irrational thoughts. He says, some of which I would not have seriously entertained under normal circumstances. They went through my mind during this period. He says they were reflected in various inexplicable, inconsistent, and inconclusive things I said and did, such as whether the girl might still be alive somewhere out in that immediate area, and whether some awful curse did actually hang over all the Kennedys. People to this day, and probably even before, talk about the Kennedy curse. And I actually had not realized that Ted himself had ever used that word.
Well, so here's the thing and here's the really, I'm sorry to say, sinister thing about that speech. So the Kennedy curse is something that people had whispered about before that. And what it referred to, obviously, was the bad luck that the Kennedy family had in terms of people dying young, in terms
plane
of
crashes, diseases, war. It was
freak accidents,
generationally.
Yes. What's so interesting is that this is the first time a Kennedy had ever publicly referenced the Kennedy curse, and he referenced it not in reference to an accident that happened to a Kennedy, but he referenced it when talking about something a Kennedy did, killing someone else. It is this really interesting rhetorical device that he used to make himself the victim, when in fact this entire press conference was about him obviously unintentionally killing a woman, but then running away from the scene. And I mean, what he has to answer for is the fact that for hours he didn't call the police. People think he could have saved her had he cared more about her rather than doing damage control for himself.
But I'm bringing up the curse because JFK Jr. and Love Story and this conversation about Carolyn Bessette currently is being romanticized and mythologized all over again. I think in part because of a tragic death,
Yes,
because it
very
was a
much
plane
so.
crash, and that fits a long story we've all been telling about this family for ages.
I think another element of that, which I think is a recurring theme in the Kennedys, is, especially these very kind of handsome, promising men dying young, there's a sense of lost potential. And I think people really
No, and nothing is
romanticize.
more romantic than potential.
Yes. And I think that's the case for both JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette, who has kind of been reclaimed by a new generation, especially as she's portrayed in the show as a very self-possessed, smart young woman.
Although when we were growing up, she was kind of a sphinx. It was like,
Exactly.
It was, to me, more Hitchcock blonde than what I'm seeing now, like Pinterest board, but maybe I've got it wrong.
No, I mean, I think that's kind of the project of the show and of the book that it's based on, to kind of reclaim her legacy, because she was seen as this. I mean, she was seen as like a money-hungry, coke-addicted, B word, and that's how she was portrayed in the media, and that's it's very kind of its time.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. 90s era JFK Jr. was like George magazine, and like everything's really cool, and this is going to be different, and there's a little bit of a sex element because you're coming off of the Clinton years where you've got Democrats being apologists for Bill Clinton's behavior. And there was a sense that he represented this new glossy kind of politics, which was living alongside, let's say, the Lad Mag era, right?
Yeah.
Like heading into the time when everyone is going to start reading like Maxim and FHM and all this stuff. George was for that guy.
Very much so, yeah. It's funny to think about now. It's funny to think about the idea of combining politics and culture as so,
Crazy.
groundbreaking.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you read coverage of George magazine at the time, he really thought that was like an incredibly new idea, that we're going to make politics sexy, and we're going to have like columnists that are, cool, and we're going to have Cindy Crawford on the cover, but there's going to be something inside about the Senate race in Massachusetts,
Well, at the time, what could you read? Vanity Fair? You know what I mean? Like it was a little... There wasn't anything quite like it. And I think the magazine celebrity launch was also an element, as you said, them always having the personal and the political together. That was family. So. That was the legacy on display there more than the politics.
I mean, JFK Jr. had Drew Barrymore, I believe, dressed as Marilyn Monroe on the cover. Like that is so kind of...
It was extremely meta.
Yeah, like it's so naughty, there were literally rumors that your father had an affair with Marilyn Monroe, and you're going to take like a hot movie star of the time and dress her as Marilyn Monroe on the cover of your magazine. So I think there was a cheekiness to it. And I actually think this is something that's not really portrayed in the series, if I could be a little critical.
No, please do.
In this series,
I'm not a Ryan Murphy superfan. Criticize away. I think his recontextualized is just like, it's his point of view. I rarely find it that reflective of other experiences.
There's something, the JFK Jr. character in the show is very straightforward. He really is just like a nice, sweet guy.
Headbands, riding his bike.
Yes, that feels entrapped by the family name, when in fact he's so clearly played to that kind of mythology in real life. And I think what made him so charming, I imagine, was that he was sort of always doing everything with a wink.
Which was very 90s irony.
Yes, exactly. That's
he
exactly
was the
it.
ironic Kennedy. The reason why I want to talk about this is because this, to me, reflects our modern preoccupations, the Me Too movement, how women are portrayed, reclaiming the story of every blonde who was treated badly in the media, fair. Can you talk about how women in the Kennedy orbit end up being portrayed in the popular culture?
Well, often they are, in fact, not portrayed at all. So we can start there. To me, one of the, if not the most tragic figure in the entire Kennedy story is Rosemary Kennedy. For those who might not know, Rosemary Kennedy is one of Joe Kennedy's children. So that means she's JFK's sister. She had some sort of ill-defined light intellectual disabilities as well as other mental health issues. I'm being vague because, we didn't have the language then that we do now, so I'm not sure what
And
the...
they purposely hid this information,
Right.
as we know,
Yeah.
not just from the public, but from the family itself.
Yeah. So basically, long story short, she was lobotomized by her father. And this was a choice that Joe Kennedy made, partly because he thought he was genuinely doing the right thing and using an experimental procedure to quote unquote cure her. But partly, it must be said, because she was becoming an obstacle to the political success of her brothers. They didn't want to have this loose cannon, for lack of a better term, in the family, in the household.
And
And
he's preparing to march 4 sons to the White House.
yes.
But there's a connection to the parts of the political legacy and pop culture legacy, even to that story, right? Whether it be the Special Olympics or the Peace Corps, there is a wing of the family that leaves these tragedies and uses their position and power to create institutions that we now know as within progressive causes.
Yeah, very much so. And I think Eunice Kennedy, who founded the Special Olympics, is someone of all the Kennedy siblings is certainly the one I don't know, admire most as a historical figure. I mean, she felt a lot of anger about what happened to her sister and also a lot of guilt because she herself didn't do anything to stop it. And she really did dedicate her life to the rights of people with disabilities and specifically intellectual disabilities. There's this sort of funny / horrible quote from her father that he said something along the lines of, if Eunice had balls, she'd be president or something, which again is like a great peek into how
So
they...
deeply on brand.
Yes,
Never
another great
leaving
peek
the
into how they viewed
brand.
women.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But I'm happy to talk about Carolyn and her treatment and sort of the...
Yeah, if you don't mind, because some people may have heard that Daryl Hannah
Yes.
wrote an op-ed in the New York Times where she really quibbled with the way she was portrayed in this series, in part because she's sort of used as the symbol of Hollywood excess. And she's like, what? I've never even done cocaine. Like, she kind of came out, was just like, this is not fair. I'm a real living person, not a narrative device. This also, though, falls in what we hear. The family was upset with the film. And I think it was Jack Schlossberg who actually was on like CBS Sunday Morning or something. And he said Ryan Murphy was making a grotesque display of somebody's life. But he also it felt like he was saying, if you don't know a Kennedy, you can't be talking about Kennedys. You don't know anything. Yeah. And I wanted to get your take on that because we project so much onto them that I don't trust a lot of narratives about them.
I mean, absolutely. We do, as part of the podcast, every month we do a Kennedy movie. We've done the Oliver Stone JFK movie, which, if you haven't seen it recently, it is psycho. I mean,
it's a lot. I was just going to say,
crazy.
It is a lot. Oliver Stone's toning at his highest, yeah.
So I've been really just inundated with fictional portrayals of the Kennedys, and I mean, the idea of accuracy is just laughable. It's because everything is either created by someone who loves the Kennedys or hates the Kennedys. I mean, an example of the former is this sort of forgotten movie from, I want to say 2006, called Bobby. Does that ring any bells?
No.
It is a movie about every single famous person. It's crazy. It's one of those movies that's like William H. Macy, Demi Moore, Sharon Stone, Lindsay Lohan, Elijah Wood. So it is about the night that Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, and it follows stories of different people staying at that hotel and how his sort of legacy and campaign affected all of them. So, Elijah Wood and Lindsay Lohan, like Elijah Wood's about to go to war. Everyone has their own connection. Anyway, point being, that is a great example of a movie that is so completely buys into the Kennedy narrative. He is portrayed as just like a fighter for civil rights and someone who would have become America's best president, and he died too young, whatever. So, yes, I've never seen any fictionalized account of events that have to do with the Kennedys where I was like, wow, this must be completely historically accurate.
I know. Oh, it's such a Rorschach test. I mean, you know how people make that joke about like, well, what if you could go back in time? What would you do? And the two things I often hear as the litmus test is sort of like going after Hitler or preventing JFK's assassination,
Right. Yeah.
which are two wildly different and two, to me, kind of random historical points to go to,
Yes.
but that in the American consciousness are a split in the timeline.
Completely.
So let's just briefly talk about the Kennedys of now and what they say about where we are now.
Yeah.
You've brought up Jack Schlossberg, which makes a lot of sense. Started online. I think he attended his first DNC like in utero. Like
Yep.
this is the only thing he's done, and now he's running for office, and he is being accused of being a nepo baby, which is alluded to nepotism, which is hilarious because like that's the entire Kennedy brand. But this is the term people use now. Then there's also like Patrick Kennedy. Which one is he?
Patrick Schwarzenegger, who was in White Lotus.
Right. Playing a privileged, not so self-aware guy.
Yes.
And let us not forget RFK Jr.
Exactly. Those are the big three.
Of the Make America Healthy Again movement.
I mean, if you had any doubt that the Kennedys are still relevant, it's like we have someone literally in charge of the Department of Health, regardless of what you think of his politics.
Yeah.
That's, then we have Jack Schlossberg. Actually, I didn't know this until I read it yesterday, leading in the polls currently in his congressional race. And then Patrick Schwarzenegger, one of the stars of the buzziest show of last year, so they're out there.
Yeah. One of the things that's been interesting is watching them handle their modern legacy, which with RFK Jr., I think politically for them feels more in line with granddad and great granddad than it does who they portrayed themselves to be, particularly Jackie Onassis, out of the assassination period, right?
Yeah.
Where she, in fact, said to Life magazine, she brought the Camelot thing into relief, referring to it multiple times. Now they're in a new position where, in a way, RFK Jr. feels at odds with the more democratic-leaning progressive point of view that people have associated them with post-war. What do you see in how they're trying to manage that? And has there been a similar rift in the past?
I guess modern era, this seems like the most meaningful rift. I mean, there are people like, for example, Caroline Kennedy, who is someone who really does not, I think, really keeps her cards close to the chest and does not make controversial public statements. I mean, she fully came out against RFK Jr., aired the family's dirty laundry, specifically said this is someone who is a liar and who is a bad person. I mean, that's not something that's very kind of, Kardashian behavior. That's not Kennedy behavior.
And then RFK's response is very Trumpian in that he's everywhere. He's like, I'm going to do these push-ups shirtless. Like, did I have an affair? I don't know. I can't hear you. Like even as everyone's talking about it, talking about his past drug use. He's more of a Trump figure than he is what people perceived as a Kennedy figure, just by way he conducts himself in public.
I think you hit the nail on the head that the way he conducts himself in public is more Trumpian than the previous Kennedys. However, the one thing I would say is that the things he does in private, the things he does aren't completely outside the norm for Kennedys. I mean,
exactly, yeah.
The Kennedy men, especially JFK, let's go with him. I mean, when you look at someone like RFK Jr., he is married to an actress. He is having extramarital affairs. He is, obsessed with his looks. I think that the connection is unfortunately a little more direct than people want to believe it is. I certainly think that the RFK Jr. thing symbolizes a break of some sort, but maybe not as big of a break as people are making it out to be, I guess would be my one sort of correction. But yeah, I mean, Jack Schlossberg is an interesting figure. He is sort of the JFK Jr. of his time. If you think about the fact that JFK Jr.'s main project was a magazine, which was the hottest thing you could do in media at the time. Jack Schlossberg's thing is an Instagram account. That's
which is the hottest media you can do at the time.
That's where media is now. It's like, okay, he's making front-facing camera videos. He's doing essentially like Instagram comedy. I mean, he's not doing it, by the way, anymore. Someone stepped in and said, now that you're running for Congress, don't do that. But if you look up old videos, I mean, it's him doing voices, doing accents.
He speaks the language of his generation.
Exactly.
Okay. So you were once a Greek kid.
That's right.
Learning about America. now that you find yourself in this strange place where you're kind of like a comedian slash,
I know.
Kennedy expert, what have you learned? Well, like, what did it teach you about America?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think one of the big things is just how completely tied up with media representation American politics are. I'm trying to sort of phrase this correctly. Like, it almost feels like there's reality and then there's media representation of reality. And people often choose to just look at the latter and like not
Mhm.
really bother themselves with what the truth is. I mean, and I think the entire Kennedy mythology is just a testament to that. Like
It is.
everyone you talk to knows the names of so many Kennedys and grew up knowing them. But if you really ask them, okay, so what did this person do? What did that person do? They will give you platitudes that are just reflections of their own political biases. So if it's a progressive, they will say, he was the great hope and he was, assassinated and it was such a wound to the American psyche and blah, blah. And then if you're conservative, you'll say like, they're complete frauds and the Kennedy mythology is all fake.
But also what I'm learning from you is how much they played a role in shaping that reality and that they
Completely.
couldn't always control it. And that's different from like the royal family to me.
Yes, because it's completely self-created. I mean, in many ways, they are the ultimate example of the American dream. I mean, they were an immigrant family, and they basically willed themselves into being a symbol of American optimism and dynamism.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us. I really appreciate it. Tell people where they can find you. And I know you've got a comedy show coming up.
Yes, yeah, I have a comedy special. It's on Amazon. It's called A Sense of Urgency. I mean, I am separately from all of this. My job is I'm a comedian. I'm a stand-up comedian, and it's funny. I was hired to do this show to be sort of initially to be like the funny one, the kind of the point was
I can
that
tell from your main points that's not how it
I
worked
know.
out. As you're like, so let me tell you about Rosemary.
I've really I know I've become so serious.
I know.
I promise I'm funny in real life.
It's a crazy story. It's a crazy story. Okay, so
yeah, the special is called A Sense of Urgency. It's on Apple and Amazon. I host a comedy podcast that is not about the Kennedys called Straightiolab on the iHeart Network. And
did you say Straightiolab?
That is correct. It is a pun on Radiolab, and it is a podcast about straight culture. We would love to have you on anytime.
I'm listen, for real. We're done. This is happening.
We had your friend Sam Sanders on, actually.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. I definitely want to do this. And in the meantime, if people want to check out the archive of your Kennedy podcast.
United States of Kennedy.
Okay. George, thank you.
Thank you so much. This was really great.